Welcome back, advanced biology students. This is lesson 3C. And in this lesson, we're going to talk about lipids. So before, in our last lesson, we talked about monomers and polymers, and then we talked about carbohydrates. Well, this lesson, we are just going to tackle lipids, not liquids, lipids. So lipids are large molecules, and they're used for energy storage. So for instance, when ducks want to fly long distances, they're going to store up lots of lipids in their system to store this energy. Or for instance, plants, they're going to use oils, another type of lipid, and they're going to store up energy in oils. For instance, soybeans have lots of oils to provide energy for the new growing plant or to provide energy for the animals eating them. So lipids are a way that animals and plants and organisms can store energy. Unused energy gets stored as lipids. So if we look at human beings, for instance, what we do is we eat a bunch of sugar. And that sugar, if we don't use that sugar, it first gets stored as glycogen in our liver, and that we learned about that last time. Glycogen's a carbohydrate. But then if we don't use that glycogen, eventually we'll just start packing all that energy together into this big, complicated molecule with lots of bonds. It stores lots of energy as a lipid. And for instance, a carbohydrate has 4 calories per gram. Right? 4 calories per 1 gram. Lipids are so good at storing energy that they get 9 calories per gram, which means that they can store over twice the amount of energy that a carbohydrate can. And that's good for us living things who want to use energy for later. We can store it in a nifty little high energy storage packet. Okay, if we're looking at these lipid molecules, a lipid has 2 monomers, and this one's sort of complex. It has this molecule called glycerol, and that's going to form like the head of the molecule. If we look at these, a polymer is going to be called a triglyceride. And it's going to kind of look like this, where it's got a head, and then it's got 3 tails coming out of it. Well, the head is that glycerol, and then the other part are these fatty acid chains, and there are 3 of them. So these 3 little tails coming off of here are fatty acid chains. The polymer, what these things all put together, this big molecule right here, is called a triglyceride, which makes sense because it's got 3 tails and a glycerol molecule, so triglyceride. Fairly easy to remember. So triglycerides form from a glycerol molecule and 3 fatty acid tails. So here's that glycerol head, and we're building that in class. We're building that in lab. You should know that it's 3 carbons, so 3 carbons bonded together. I'll just put this in here, even though it's kind of confusing and hard to see. And then we got that carboxyl group, that's OH coming off here that bonds with the carboxyl group on the fatty acid. And it's got these fatty acid tails, and we are familiar with those from class. A different type, so triglycerides are one type of lipid. So triglycerides are one type. Another type of lipid that looks a little different is a wax. Okay, and waxes are used by animals or in plants as a covering. So as we know, lipids are hydrophobic, which means that water and oil don't mix. So waxes are this great thing that's used as a covering. So if we look at a leaf, you'll notice that it has this waxy covering on the outside of the leaf. We'll draw a dicot leaf here. So you'll notice a waxy covering. Well, that's to keep water in. To keep water in, we don't want the water escaping the leaf. So it has this, whoops, that's a big O. So it has this waxy covering on the outside of a leaf called a cuticle to lock in the water. It's also used in animals, for instance, ducks. This is really important. So if you're a duck and you're landing, I'll draw sort of a duck here. And if you're a bird and you're landing on a pool of water, like a lake, you don't want to absorb all the water that you land because then you'll be too heavy to take off again. And so that wax covering on the leaf, on the feathers, helps you keep out the water. Another type of molecule that's a lipid and that we don't talk about too often are steroids. And a big example of a steroid type molecule is cholesterol. Now we think of cholesterol as being this evil molecule that's bad if you eat, but actually it's an integral part of cell membranes. So you need it for cell membranes. And it's also used as chemical messengers, and we call those hormones. So these steroids, a lot of times, are used as chemical messengers, and they're an important part of these cell membranes. Okay, we'll go back here for a second. Some of these chemical messengers, like testosterone and estrogen, are really important to making sure your body functions. Okay, and I want to talk just briefly about saturated versus unsaturated. So here's this is a saturated saturated lipid, because we notice that every place that we can have a hydrogen, we have them. So we notice that there are 2 hydrogens to every carbon, except for the last one, which has 3. But then these carbons bonded together. So like this one has 2 carbons. This one has, 2 hydrogens. This one has 2 hydrogens. This one has 2 hydrogens. Okay. Well, saturated means it has the maximum number of hydrogens. So it is saturated with hydrogens. Saturated with hydrogen. It has a maximum number. How to make this thing unsaturated is if we have double bonds. I'm going to draw this out here. So if we have carbon, so we have these big long chains of carbon that make the fatty acid. If we double bond 2 of these carbons together, that means the carbon can form 4 bonds. So if you look at this carbon, it's 1, 2, 3. So it's going to have 1 hydrogen coming off of it instead of the normal 2. So if I bond to another carbon out here, this one's only going to have 1 hydrogen. So because of that, we removed a couple of hydrogens out here, and removing those couple of hydrogens, we added this double bond, and so which means that this is unsaturated with hydrogens. It's not completely full with hydrogens, and it has those double bonds. Those double bonds are really important because they make the molecule flexible. They make the molecule able to bend, which means unsaturated fats are usually liquid at room temperature, and they're oils. Oils, where saturated fats are solid at room temperature, and they're things like fats and that type. Okay, so if you have any questions about that, class, feel free to ask me anytime. I would love to explain that more to you. Have a good day, class.